Hey, thanks for coming in and going through the rest of this information with me from the Question of Slavery worksheet. Where we left off was with John Brown's raid. So, John Brown is in Pottawatomie, Kansas, and he leads a group of anti slavery men and ends up attacking a pro slavery town. What ends up happening is that five men do end up being murdered. And because of his involvement in this, John Brown ends up on trial and ends up being executed. And so, taking a look at this quote, and then I'll go back to talk about part B. It says, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed, it might be done. Basically thinking that maybe we could have solved this problem of slavery, but now I believe only blood will solve this problem, basically alluding to the war that will come. So going back to John Brown himself here and talking about this image, because it'll explain the ease or increased tensions. For this image, on the back left of the painting, you have the picture of a tornado. And then you also have on the left front here some men and women moving west. You also have that similar scene here on the right. That would talk about the idea of manifest destiny, settling the area of Kansas, that type of idea. You then also have here in the center, you have, an American flag, and you have the Confederate flag. And then here in the middle, you have John Brown and kind of all of his glory. And it looks like he's kind of stepping on two men, whether implying from the war itself and the battle that took place in Kansas between pro-slavery and anti-slavery, or even, talking about perhaps the men that he murdered. The question of increase or ease tensions is one of both. Actually, it increased tensions for both sides. The Southerners viewed John Brown as a killer or a murderer because of his actions. And the abolitionists, the Northerners for John Brown's raid, end up viewing this also to increase tensions because he was executed. So both the North and the South would say increased tensions, but for different reasons. The last part that we ended up missing today in class is just a few miscellaneous slides that I would like you to add underneath your information about John Brown's raid. Everything prior to this point was talking about like the political actions and laws that were trying to solve the problem of slavery and being free. But what really adds insult to injury or makes the situation worse, the Civil War exacerbations, as I would call them. You have two of them. One is taxes. And with this, by all means, shorthand it any way that you want. But the deal going on, so keep in mind taxes, or I call them taxes, really it's supposed to be tariffs. Tariffs are a dollar amount placed on products when you typically would import or export them. Now, in our modern day and age, we only pay import taxes, products that are being brought into our nation. We do not pay export taxes. However, back in the day, we paid both. Now, keep in mind, export taxes would be items that are exiting our country. Well, the Southerners felt that these were relatively unfair because not only did they have to export all of their cotton, but then also they imported a number of products because it's either paying the abroad prices or it's paying the northern prices. And either way, they were going to be paying more. The Southerners also viewed that there was an unfair structure for the rates of transportation, that Southerners had to pay more for perhaps the same distance that an item would be shipped, okay, compared to a Northerner. What ends up happening with this is, keep in mind, we don't have the Transcontinental Railroad yet, and the railroads are going to be individually owned, but same thing with like tolls along roads and canals and things like that. And so the Southerners felt that they were just paying an unfair amount for the transportation of products. The banks also felt that they were being treated unfairly. So most of the money since Alexander Hamilton's time, even through Jackson with the pet banks, was centered in the North. The banks in the South, in order to stay solvent or still open, would have to get loans from the banks in the North, but they would end up paying an extra interest rate on it, which means that it was even more expensive for Southern banks to get loans to keep their doors open to then give like the Southerners loans as well. The other exacerbation is about sectionalism. And what I think is an interesting perspective on this is about population. So a few chapters ago, we had talked about German and Irish immigrants coming into the US, but most of the immigrants stayed in the North, like the northern cities, or they migrated towards Midwestern areas. And keep in mind, because those areas then grew in population, those areas then also grew in political power, in particular in the House of Representatives. And at first, remember back in like chapter 10, the southern states were really pleased with how the House of Representatives was established because it was part of those compromises with the Constitution that a slave could count as 3/5 of a person. But realize now that you have an increase in immigrants coming to the US and they counted as a full person, if you will. And so the population increases, but so does the power associated with it for individual states. Then lastly, you have like our overall Civil War cause. And this is going to be the emotional and economic cause. It's, of course, slavery. Now, I say it's the emotional cause because of the morals, right? But I also say it's the economic cause because of cotton, okay? And that the Southerners relied on the slaves to keep the cotton industry going. So with that, I leave you guys. If you need anything clarified or explained further, please don't hesitate to reach out. But thank you for paying attention and for being willing to go this extra step for our class.